So in this video, I'm going to be showing you how I finished up this large linen closet. This video is the second part, so it's going to be building that whole top part. But I'm going to start by showing you how I made the new drawer box, which goes in the opening I showed in last week's video. So pretty simple. I'm making this all out of scrap. I usually make this stuff out of 3/4 inch ply, so I have to use undermount slides for 3/4 inch ply. I do that because I make a lot of these cabinet carcasses out of 3/4 inch ply, so I have it laying around the shop. But for this one, I happen to have enough 1/2 inch for it, so it works just as well. Pretty simple. It's matching the dimensions of the drawers that were already in the vanity, so all I had to do was make the box and then pop the old front on top of it. Sometimes for the front joint I use dovetails, but the finger joint jig I made in my shop, I have it on hand. It's much faster to set up than the dovetail jig I have, so I took that out and used that to make these. You only really need that joint on the front corners because that's where all the pulling force is going to be for a drawer box. The back I'm just going to stick to rabbets because, as you can see, I'm using an old base from the old dresser, so that's going to stay the same width. Like I mentioned in the previous video, this is matching it exactly, so I was able to use some of those old parts. It's shallower because it doesn't go as deep as the dresser, so I have to cut some of the depth down on these parts. But this piece I cut off, I'll cut it again and mount that for the backer. So all in all, making one drawer box could be a little bit frustrating because it's a little bit of a process. It actually makes more sense if you have to do like 8 or so at once. It's much faster. To do one this way can be a little tedious, but all in all, it's pretty quick. And I could pop it in the drawer. Like I said, I'm using Blum undermount slides. I have a video on the channel showing you how to do those. The math can be a little intimidating at first. It's slightly different than side mount slides, but once you get it down pat, they're really easy, highly adjustable, and somewhat forgiving. It's pretty much what I use exclusively in the shop. So then I could take, I have this glued up, I could put it on wax paper so it didn't stick because I wasn't ready for it to stick to the original dresser yet. The drawer box, I think at this point, is glued up. I don't think I filmed the glue up, and I could just plop it into place, make sure it fits, and then I can measure for the front. So with this, because of these long runners, the one on the bottom bows a little bit and one on the top dips a little bit. Eventually they'll be screwed to the top cabinet and screwed to the dresser, so it won't be an issue. But you might notice as I start making the reveals for this cabinet, they look a little off in the center. That all pretty much gets fixed at the end. So this drawer front is recycled from the first dresser I had. The customer helped me plan out all the sizes for everything. She was really helpful with that. So I knew I had to save that and use it for this so the width stays the same, and I just had to cut it down for this new drawer box. I had to mount a couple pieces of scrap in there. I'm using 12-inch slides for this because that's what would fit in this cabinet. 12-inch Blum undermount drawer slides do not have bottom mounts, so I had to mount a bottom for it to sit on, but then also a side mount so I could screw it in. Now they recommend cutting out a notch for the back. The way I do it is I just mount the back. I don't have that back piece of the drawer box go all the way down, so I don't have to notch it. I just plop it in the opening, get the mark for where I need to drill the hole for the backer mounts to align, drill that hole, and then I could pop it in place, put the mounting on the bottom. Like I said earlier, if you want to switch over to those slides, there's a slight learning curve at first, but I have not gone back to side mount slides since making the switch. And then the face I could just put in there with some cards to get my reveal, and I had double-side tape on there so I could stick it in place and then screw that piece to it. So that is basically the drawer box. You could see because it's recycled, there's some chips off the edge. I don't think I filmed it, but all I did for those edges is I just cut a piece of teak and filled them in so that isn't noticeable anymore. So then I could start the upper cabinet, and when you'll see later I had doors that had to fit in here. This is fitting into a nook, so the measurements had to be pretty exact. And she originally wanted adjustable shelves, but I recommended putting at least one of these shelves as a permanent mount. And that is just because this plywood's not going to be super flat top to bottom, and the fixed shelves help keep everything square. So we agreed to put the middle shelf as a fixed shelf and then the other two as adjustables, and that's basically what I'm doing here. These are the doors that are going in the front, and basically they were too wide to make them inset, but she wanted them to look inset. So this cabinet is going to be mounted 3/4 of an inch back from the front of this drawer box, and then the top will have a spacer, so the doors will appear inset. The problem is this dresser was over 4 feet wide, so I ended up having to buy an extra sheet of plywood in order to get my joints that I wanted. I like to join this stuff with rabbets and dados. You could see if I had just done a shallow dado, it would have worked with 48 inches, but it was just too shallow. So I did my test cuts, I measured, and then I could put these shelves in. Like I said, the bottom is pretty self-explanatory. That's a rabbet. Then there's a shelf in the middle, and the shelf at the top is lower than the ceiling because it's going to have that false front, and the doors will fit inside that frame. So all I did for this is I have a dado stack in the radial arm saw. This plywood is going to be about 23-30 seconds, so you have to use the shims that come with the stack, and I could just cut where those shelves are going to be. Like I said, she wanted the center one perfectly in the middle, so that was pretty easy, top, bottom, middle. And then before I dry fit this together, I'm going to put the backer on it, which is a 1/2 inch backer. This is a very big cabinet. Bigger cabinets, I prefer to do bigger backers, especially since I have to transport this stuff. There's a lot of torquing that goes between moving this stuff out of my shop into my truck to the customer's house and installing it, and I just prefer 1/2 inch backers. So that is adding the rabbet on the backer. And then, like I said, I could dry fit these. You could see the way I did it. The rabbet meets in the middle, kind of like a book spline. You don't want to put them on the same side because they won't match out. I mention that whenever I cut these cabinets because I have done that wrong before. And if it's paint grade, you can usually fix it, but if it's not, you usually have to recut them. So once that's done, I can measure the depth of my shelves. I can cut down my shelves. So I'm going to do that one, and all these shelves are going to be the same because technically the top and the bottom are not shelves, but they're going to be fixed in place. So I can rip down plywood, cut it down on the radial arm saw, and then put all of that into place. Now I usually do a face frame on these cabinets. I didn't do that with this. That is because she wants this stained. She wants it to match the teak as close as possible, which is a little bit of a task in and of itself because this is maple. I didn't use oak because the grain pattern for oak is just way too different from teak. We did some tests and it really didn't work out. You'll see later the match actually worked out pretty well, but I didn't do the face frame around it, the hardwood face frame, because there's no way I would have gotten that to match, and it just would have been too stark of a difference. So you'll see I use edge banding on this. I don't love it, but for a linen closet, and I've been in their house, they're very tidy, clean people. I'm not super concerned about not having that hardwood edge on the front. It's not something kids are going to be using, and that's usually when you need that extra protection. So I just dry fit this together with some ratchet straps, put it in place. At this point, it's not really that heavy at all, and I snapped a photo and sent it to her. If you are getting into woodworking and you're watching these videos, I recommend doing that as you go. Cannot tell you how many times sending a customer a photo helped with a headache down the line. They wanted to change something, and I could change it at this point. Once stuff is glued together, it gets really difficult. So with it dry fit, I could cut the backer, put that in place, pretty self-explanatory. And then after I sent her the photo, she actually decided to completely bypass the fixed shelf, the adjustable shelves, and make all of them fixed. This was not a big deal because that carcass had to come apart anyway, and I prefer doing fixed shelves. It's easier to do in the shop. I don't have to drill the mounting holes, and then I don't have to edge band 4 sides of plywood. It's an easier process, so I was really happy she actually decided to make that change. I was going to put undermount supports on this because, like I said, this is over 4 foot wide, so this would eventually bow. But what we decided to do was do a center style, which I'm going to connect using lap joints, and the doors actually hide this center style, so you only see it when you open the cabinet. I thought this was a really good compromise for the fact that this was so wide, and it was a little bit of an easier process once again than doing it with the runners underneath. So you could see I took my initial measurements from the corner of the cabinet because that's where it's going to be the most square. You saw when I moved it to the center already, I think 3 of my marks were off because that plywood is just naturally going to bow. I know this stuff looks flat, it really isn't. So then once I had that in place, I could mark for where the laps on the receiving ply are going to go. There's many ways I could have done this. The easiest way and the fastest way to do it was just to do it on the table saw with the miter gauge. It was a little awkward because these are really big pieces, but you could see I'm not removing a lot of material. So I could go through and cut the outer edges so they're all identical. You could see I was using a stop on the table saw to make sure they're all the same, so the whole thing will glue up square. And then I'm just going to really slowly slide this back and forth over the blade and remove that excess material. And the goal for this is to make these all perfect. The plus side of these joints is when they're perfect, everything will line up square. If they're a little off, it's going to be a huge problem. So you can see all my notches were perfect. They lined up with this center spline. Everything fit into place, and then I can glue this together. Interestingly enough, this same customer also really likes mid-century modern furniture, and when I told her I prefer to do at least 1 fixed shelf on all of these projects, she said that that was interesting because her mid-century modern furniture always has 1 fixed shelf. And while mid-century modern is not necessarily my style, it is really well-built furniture, especially for mass-produced furniture, I should say. And then I'm just going to glue this together. This was a really big piece. I started off on my table, but I couldn't get around it the way I wanted to, so I moved it to the ground. I'm just tacking the pieces in place. The nice things about rabbits and dados are the cabinet kind of holds itself in place. I could slide all of my pieces in, clamp it together, let it set up overnight, and then, like I said, the front of this is getting edge banded. This is the part where I told you I usually put hardwood, but I was nervous about getting the hardwood to match the ply, especially since I was trying to get the ply that's not teak to match teak. So that was kind of what I went with. I usually do put a face frame on this. So now came mounting the doors. I was really nervous to have these in the shop. I'm not super clumsy, but I will throw stuff every once in a while. People that watch the channel know that. And usually that's not that big of a deal, but these lead glass windows are one of those things that I do not have the capabilities to fix. Maybe if I watched a YouTube channel I could, but it's one of those things if I broke, I was really screwed. So as you can see, they were originally partial inset doors, which means they have this angled groove around all of the edges. In order to use the cup hinges I wanted to use, I had to fill in that on the outer edge. It would look kind of stupid having these open as inset doors with that bit removed, so I just decided to do it on all 4 sides. It was pretty easy. I found the angle matched on the miter saw, and then once I got it correct on the miter saw, I could transfer that to the table saw. I think it was like 12 degrees or something like that, and just cut down that material, remove the paint that was on there so I could glue it, and then pretty simple, just brad it in place as it dries. I believe she might be keeping the fronts of these rustic. I don't know if she's painting the inside, but honestly you don't even really notice it that much because I end up sanding down all of that inside paint. I know it looks like bare wood right now, but it's actually kind of a yellowish tannish paint. So that's what that looks like, and then I can plop these in place. Now, like I said, I didn't want to remove a lot of material off of these because I was really nervous about sending these through the table saw. Also, they're heavy, so I didn't want to remove a bunch of material off the stile and then them potentially start twerking in the wrong direction. So all I did, because as you could see the edges weren't square, was I ripped the edges square. So I'm removing like less than a 1/16 of an inch off of all 4 sides. After I did that, they fit enough where I could use the hinges I wanted to use. What I ended up using for this project, which I don't use a ton, were full overlay hinges. Those are the ones I went with. Those are the ones that worked. So after removing that little bit of material, you can see they're square and they're set off enough from the frame they'll be able to open. So I ended up washing these. There's someone who painted these at one point, got a lot of excess paint on there, so they need a little bit of work, but the customer's doing that. But I got most of the dust off of there, and I can mount my cup hinges. Like I said, these are tall doors and they're heavy, so I went with 3. The one hole I originally measured was, of course, I do this a lot, right where a shelf was, so I ended up having to move it and plug that hole. But all I did was lay this on top. I knew this would be easier and I'd be less likely to break them if I did this while the cabinet was laying down first. Could lay the door on top, mark where those hinges were, drill those in place, and then mount them. So if you're not used to using these hinges, this is a full overlay hinge I have. The one in the middle is a half overlay, and this one on the edge is a full, is an insert hedge. So you'll see the crank changes angles as they go, but if you're looking for hinges, you go to the store to buy them. They're always in the wrong spot, so make sure you look for that. Then I can put the cabinet on top of what I already had. My camera fell over during this process, as you just saw, but the doors were already done, so all I had to do now was pop them in place. So a little nerve-wracking, but it ended up working out. Now, like I said, the sides of these doors weren't square, so neither were the bottoms. I just used a laser level to mark a straight line, and then I could rip those clean. Because the sides of the door are now square, all I had to do was put these on the radial arm saw and cut them. I didn't have to cut them at an angle or anything like that. Just cleaned up the bottom. And I've once again did a pretty heavy reveal on these doors, and that is because everything is mostly solid wood, so it is going to move quite a bit. And then I could put those doors back in place and stain this. I didn't show the top. I'll show it a little bit later. The original teak, there's not a lot of teak stains on the market. There's a lot of teak oils, which won't make this look like teak. But luckily, General Finishes, as you can see on the can, makes a stain called Danish teak, which was just about perfect. And she was okay. She knew going into it, it was not going to be a perfect match. Obviously, it's maple. She just wanted it to be close enough. And with the doors closed, you can barely even tell. I used a wood conditioner pre-stain before putting the stain on. You could see what it looks like. It actually matches pretty well. And the top, like I said, I didn't film because I sometimes forget to film stuff, but it's basically just a plank of plywood over the top. And now you can see what I mean by those doors now look inset. And it looks weird in the shop because this is fitting into a nook, but at the end you'll see the photos, it actually kind of looks like it built in the space, and she's gonna trim it out. And that's what it looks like open. I was pretty happy. The stain match was one of the things I was most nervous about, but that General Finishes stain, which is also a very nice grade of stain, worked out really well. And so soft close on the doors. The doors are going to be getting hardware, but I didn't install those. I actually have to go back to this job site next week, so if she has them at that point, I'll probably do it. And then people were mentioning that they noticed the original drawers had cutouts on them, and that is because she had these in her bathroom and was using them as vanities for quite a few years. So she didn't ask me to do this, but it was very simple to do. Being a really chill, nice client who helps you out with measurements and whatnot, goes a long way in my book. So I fixed these just to fix them because they were kind of driving me crazy anyway. All I did, these bottoms I knew from the original project just slid right out. They weren't glued in place. There were some screws in the back holding them in place. I could pop them out. And all I'm going to do is square up this angle they have and patch it. So you could see on the radial arm saw I cut those two sides, the table saw I could lower the material onto the blade and cut it square there, finish it up with a handsaw. So now what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to put a 3-sided lap joint on the bottom of this plank, and then the patch is going to have the receiving lap joint. I'm just cutting them with a rabbiting bit in my router. This will pop into place, and I'm going to use epoxy, and it's almost as sturdy as it would be if it was not originally cut. So this project is also not going to have a finish. If you watch the vanity project, that also did not have a finish. I always recommend finishes, but like I said, she had these dressers in her bathroom without a finish on them for quite a few years, and she did not mind that. So if she is well aware of the possibilities with not putting a finish on there, which I mentioned, and she's okay with it, I'm fine with it. It saves me a lot of time, to be perfectly honest. The teak does look nice. And then to fix the backer there, I did the exact same thing. I just put a lap joint, meet them together, used epoxy because I'm impatient for this part, and that is what it looks like. The bathroom is obviously gorgeous, it's brand new, but it's long, so this is honestly the best angle I could get of it. You can't really get super close to it. And then for people that watch the channel, I put knobs on the vanity while I was there, and that's in place, and that's what it looks like as well. So both of these pieces of furniture came from 2 dressers she had, and I bought some extra plywood to make them work.